like sunshine, like springtime, like something's in the water and I'm taking a deep dive. I'm feeling so weightless, like I'm gonna make it, and nothing in the universe can take this. I can see it clearly now, nothing gonna bring me down. I got my head held high, I'm on my way, and I'm following the signs to my happy place. I'm walking in the light of a brand new day, and I'm right where I belong in my happy place. I got my head held high, I'm on my way, and I'm following the signs to my happy place. I'm walking in the light of a brand new day, and I'm right where I belong in my happy place. And I'm right where I belong in my happy place. And I'm right where I belong in my happy place.
Thank you for joining us and welcome to the National University of Singapore Yong Lin School of Medicine Healthy Longevity webinar series. Thanks again for joining us, and we have a great talk today. We have Nir Barzilai, who is going to be telling us everything about aging in 1 hour. So that's your task, Nir. But before we get to that, I have to remind you to use the Q&A function if you want to ask questions, and we will try to get those questions to Nir at the end of the talk. And before we get started with Nir, I've asked one of my graduate students, Stephen Raj, to present a recent paper that's been published in the field, and this one should be of interest. It's on an alternate day fasting in a healthy population. So, Stephen?
Thanks, Brian. Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen, and I'm a graduate student in Prof. Brian Kennedy's lab in the Center for Healthy Longevity. In one of the previous episodes, my colleague Guan Xiaoping presented to you a paper on how intermittent fasting improves the health and survival of mice. We thought it would be good to do a follow-up on that paper to show you another study, a randomized controlled trial done with intermittent fasting as the intervention. Over the past few years, there have been multiple clinical trials investigating the effects of calorie restriction and intermittent fasting. However, most of them investigated the effects of fasting either in overweight subjects or subjects that suffered from metabolic syndrome. What makes this particular study noteworthy is that it is one of the first studies to investigate the effects of fasting on healthy, non-overweight, and non-diabetic individuals. This would allow us to better ascertain the effects of fasting on molecular markers of aging. The fasting paradigm that was used in this study was an alternate day fast, or ADF for short. An added plus of this study is that the authors compared the effects of a short-term fast of 4 weeks with a long-term fast of 6 months. So let me now walk you through some of the key findings of this study. The study showed that fasting improved multiple physiological and molecular markers of aging. One of the key highlights of this study is that alternate day fasting for several months is safe in healthy individuals. No adverse effects were seen in this study even after 6 months of fasting. In this fasting paradigm, participants were instructed to eat every second day as per normal, but to completely exclude solid and liquid foods and caloric beverages on the fast days. However, study participants were allowed to consume non-caloric beverages such as water, unsweetened black or green tea, or coffee on the fast day. On average, there was a 37% calorie restriction for a 4-week fast. Similar trends were also observed in the long-term fasting group. Let us now look at some of the benefits of fasting in greater detail. A short-term alternate day fast of 4 weeks was already sufficient to impact body composition, especially the total fat mass. Fasting especially reduced the trunk fat content and in particular reduced the visceral fat content, which is believed to be the most lipotoxic and associated with cardiovascular disease risk. The reduction in total fat mass also improved the fat to lean body ratio. Elevated ketone levels of beta-hydroxybutyrate were also observed, which have been reported in other studies for its anti-aging and cardioprotective effects. For example, beta-hydroxybutyrate levels have been shown to indirectly reduce blood pressure and also improve cerebral blood flow in the aging brain. The short-term fast was also sufficient to reduce cardiovascular markers, reducing systolic and diastolic blood pressure and heart rate. The fasted group also had reduced arterial and pulse pressure and a reduced pulse wave velocity. Consequently, the Framingham risk score, which measures the risk of developing cardiovascular disease in the next 10 years, is also reduced. These improvements in cardiovascular markers were also shown to be independent of physical activity as measured by the activity energy expenditure, which showed no difference between the control and fasting groups. Similarly, in the long-term fast of 6 months, there was also an improvement in multiple cardiovascular markers. Total cholesterol levels, LDL, VLDL, and triglyceride levels were all decreased, while the levels of HDL cholesterol remained unchanged. In the long-term fasting cohort, there was also reduced levels of soluble ICAM1, which is a marker for age-associated inflammation. Metabolomic analysis of the plasma further revealed that fasting depletes the amino acid pool. This includes the amino acid methionine, and we know that methionine restriction has been shown in multiple other studies to improve health span and lifespan in model organisms. Metabolomics also showed that free fatty acids were enriched under fasting conditions. So most likely, these changes can be attributed to the enhanced lipolysis in adipose tissue, coupled with the enhanced capture of amino acids for gluconeogenesis. Collectively, while these results are promising, there's still much we can learn about the global changes induced by intermittent fasting in humans. If you would like to find out more about intermittent fasting and are interested, we would recommend you to tune in to one of our earlier episodes on the show, where we hosted Dr. Walter Longo as he shared his thoughts on this exciting subject. So that's all from me. Over to you now, Brian.
Thanks, Stephen. That was great. And it'll be a good lead-in talking about metabolism to Nir's talk. So Nir Barzilai is the director of pretty much everything. He's the director of the Institute for Aging Research at Albert Einstein, the Paul Glenn Center for the Biology of Human Aging Research there. Also the National Institute of Health Schock Center for Excellence in the Basic Biology of Aging at Einstein. He's have too many awards and accomplishments for me to go through in detail. So what I'm going to do instead is just give you the title of his talk, which is Age Later, Lessons for This Pandemic and the Next, and turn it over to him. Thanks a lot, Nir.
Thank you, Brian. Maybe I'm the boss of everything, but what I really want to be is come to Singapore and have you be my boss. I have, as you know, a great admiration for Singapore. I've been visiting professor and I'm planning to recapture this title again. NUS and Einstein have a sisterhood or brotherhood relationship. I don't remember which. Sex actually is important in aging, but I'll let you know later. I have admiration for the leadership. Yap-Seng Chong is really visionary, and part of that is we was able to get you, Brian. And my last trip actually was in Singapore, and that was already in COVID time, February. And as you can imagine, in Singapore, although there was COVID around, I was safe. I got then back to New York and then got COVID. and so I missed you guys. I want to just start, and I know I'm not the first, and you know what? It's okay to hear some words again, but if you guys here are listening to me and you don't know that, yeah, you know that aging has biology because you know who's old and who's young, but if you don't know that aging is flexible, this biology is flexible, and this biology can be targeted, and targeting biology of aging can, attain better health span, really delay aging, stop aging, and reverse it in several times. You're on the wrong program now. So I just think this is a great educational effort, and I'm just proud to be with you. And now I'll share my screen. And the lessons from this pandemic and next, because I'll tell you, this pandemic just underlined everything we're talking about. And what you see here is 4 panels from around the world: China, Italy, United States and EU, and they all show the same thing. So let me just point to China here, okay? If you're over the age of 80, your chances of dying is about 200-fold than if you're at the age of 20. Okay, aging is the biggest risk factor from dying from COVID. And this really underlines aging and its diseases, and it doesn't matter what you put on the older body, there's going to be an increase in mortality. And the question, does it have to be this way? This is true to other diseases. When you look at the chances of dying from any of those diseases here across age, you see, just as an example, for cardiovascular disease, the risks go from 5 to 100,000 to 5,000 to 100,000. So the risk of dying from cardiovascular is 1,000-fold more as you get old. And you can stop me and say, hey, you know, cholesterol is the biggest risk for cardiovascular disease. No, cholesterol is like a 3-fold risk, okay? And the same is for cancer. Look how parallel are those lines, and for diabetes and for Alzheimer. Aging is the major risk factor, and this is because aging drives those diseases. And you can decide to stop any disease you want. I mean, what happens to those people with cardiovascular disease that go with a heart attack to the hospital, right? In Singapore, they'll get stent or they'll get bypass. But what happened to them in 2 years? They start getting diabetes, cancer, Alzheimer, because all you did, you treated the heart specifically and not the aging part. Okay, so the green here is death from pneumonia, which if we didn't know that there's a COVID-specific epidemic, it would fall there. It's also going from 1 to 1,000, which is kind of what we're seeing here. So I want to just really put a concept in here, because you can say, hey, you know, there's a lot of genetics for every one of those diseases, genetics for heart and for cancer and for Alzheimer and for diabetes. And the point I want to make is those are going to decide which disease you're going to get first. Okay, so it's much more important challenge for us to know, to understand the biological versus chronological age. Some people are aging faster and some people are aging slower. Which disease you're going to get first maybe depends on your genetics, but the aging biology is much, much more important. And I'll say another thing. This biology is not so hard to start targeting. So can we do it? Well, I think you know from Brian, one of the original author, and from many other speakers, that we all agree on hallmarks of aging. And by the way, those hallmarks of aging here are not exactly the same hallmarks. We call them a little bit different, but it doesn't really matter because you have to group them a little bit differently. It really doesn't matter. We kind of agree on the hallmark. And just to remind you, the hallmarks are not the causes of aging, but the hallmarks are, to be a hallmark, it means that you targeted it and you showed in animal models that you live healthier and you live longer. That's how you become a hallmark. But the important thing about the hallmark is that they're interconnected. So you can fix one and have effects on the others. And this is something that have surprised us, and we haven't understood it for a while. But you know, if you take the cell and make it younger, you improve lots of things. Relevant to the COVID is, of course, decreasing immune function and the inflammation. Both are major features of the severe infection. So as you know, healthy lifespan. And I'm glad that this program is called Healthy Longevity, okay, because it's about health. Healthy lifespan has been extended in numerous animal models, and relevant drugs have been in use. I'm sure you heard about rapamycin. I'll tell you a little bit about metformin. And when you have COVID, what you want to be prepared to, you have to increase the immunity and decrease the inflammation. But remember that we're talking about an old body. We have to increase the ability of this old body to be sustained during the disease. The whole body has to be better. And this is important for COVID, and I'll show you data later. This is important against the vaccine. By no way do I believe that the vaccine is as effective in elderly. We can talk about it later. But this is important against the next virus. And this is important against any disease. We have to start targeting aging and do it better and faster. The reason I said I'm skeptical about immunization is that as COVID appeared in March, the Nature had this graph that basically shows what happened with age to the number of diseases that somebody has. Okay, so it goes from the light colors are 0 to the dark color that are more than 7 diseases. And you see that 85-year-old people have more than 4 diseases. Half of them have more than 5 diseases. At age 65, half of the people have less than 2 diseases, and half of the people have more than 2 diseases. For me, it's not an issue of multimorbidity, it's an issue of aging. Those are the half of the people that age faster and half of the people that age slower. Now, when you read about the vaccination, you see that the people over 75, it doesn't say that, you have to calculate it. People over the age of 75, you see them, how many of them are in the vaccination. And when you count the multimorbidities, it's the same amount of multimorbidities for people. So at most, those people have 1 disease each. This is not the aging we have to protect. Those are the half that age slower. We have to be skeptical, and we probably have to do more in order to protect people. I was looking at centenarians, and I see that I'm talking slower than I want, and the time is passing, so I'll skip some slides. But I've collected centenarians. Those are, for example, 4 siblings. Each one of them lived over the age of 102, and I've collected over 750 of those in a study. And the most important thing about them for you to know, that it's not that they got sick when everybody got sick and died, but their lifespan was extended. Those are 2 groups of controls and 2 groups of centenarians, and that's their health span. That's the diseases that they got, and they got their diseases 30 years later. So it's health span and lifespan that goes together. That's why it's so important to study them. And not only that, but they have a contraction of morbidity. In other words, they spend very little time at the end of their life sick. Look, at age 100, 30% of my centenarians don't have any disease. A lot of them just don't wake up one morning. And that's why there's what we call longevity dividend. It's an example that we have the capacity to live healthier and longer, and it's going to be of benefit to society to find a way to do it. By the way, there's a lot of centenarians that survived COVID. This is the oldest. She's 179 in Italy, in France, that survived COVID. One of the questions we asked is, there is a suspicion in other diseases that the animal models haven't been helping us so much. so many animal models for diseases have failed us. We couldn't really develop therapy. And we're claiming, hey, aging is universal, okay? Everybody aged the same thing. Can we depict it in humans? And I was going to spend more time on that, but it's really an omic question. We have whole exome sequencing for 3,000 people, out of them 750 are centenarians. What can we find about their aging? And we did a whole bunch of work, and I'm not going to talk about it, except that every one of the genotypes that we found, every one of the changes was assigned to a network, because we're not built out of a single genotype, we're built out of many genotypes at a time. And the most important thing, that the leading genotypes, and what I'm saying is the differences between centenarians and people without longevity, unrelated people without longevity, what's coming out is exactly what we knew: mTOR signaling, insulin IGF signaling, MAP kinase signaling, and others, okay? So we kind of have confirmation that the mechanisms that we brought from animals, and we said, hey, they're conserved, are conserved. And that's going to be the difference between us. We also looked at biomarkers and asked, what are the biomarkers for aging? And we use a cool technology, and I'll just show you that the proteomic level, and this is called a volcano plot. And what you see here is you have this volcano, and you put the data in the mountain, and the volcano spits out those red hot rocks. And the higher they go, the higher the statistical value. And the farther they go is what size of effect. And basically you see here that there are 793 proteins that significantly change between age 65 and 95. And those biomarkers are very revealing. And the most important part of them is that a lot of them are breakdown proteins, okay? Breakdown of collagen, degranulation of platelets, of neutrophil. And at first I thought, oh, that's a lot of noise. But in fact, I predict that those are the important markers, because no matter how we target aging, we're going to stop the breakdown. So this whole field of biomarkers, whether it's genomic or proteomic or metabolomic, like you saw in the example before, are rapidly developing, and it's going to be very important for us to distinguish between biological and chronological age. So there is a problem for us on another level, really a political level, and that is that usually you have a disease, you develop a drug, you test the drug, and the pharmaceuticals are making money of that. And we want more drugs and more processes, and the pharmaceutical wants new drugs and better drugs to make more money. The problem with aging is that we don't have really a way in our institutes at the FDA to target aging or to prevent aging. We don't have this indication. And if aging is not a recognized preventable condition, the healthcare providers don't have to pay their clients for them to be healthy. And the pharmaceuticals will not develop drug, because you need a business plan in order to develop this drug. And we're using a drug that's called metformin, because metformin actually targets all the hallmarks of aging, okay? Are you skeptical? Well, again, I don't know what metformin starts to do first, maybe those things here in the middle. But once you fixed with any drug, the same with rapamycin, once you fix the aging process, you get a lot of improvement in other things. Okay, so you can find this internet of hallmarks that suggests that those drugs are really fixing aging. But the interesting thing is metformin has been around for 70 years. It really started to prevent flu and malaria. And it was at that time that it was discovered that it lowers glucose in diabetics. But this is not how it started, and this is not how it's going to end. It's generic and it's cheap. And we're doing a study that's called TAME that will start immediately after the pandemic to really show to the FDA that we can prevent several age-related diseases. There's data from animals. You give animals metformin, they live much healthier and longer. There's also evidence from human, and that's the important thing, targeting each disease. So if you give non-diabetic people metformin, it will prevent diabetes. If you give diabetic people metformin compared to other drugs, it delays cardiovascular disease. Metformin in hundreds of studies is associated with less cancers, all type of cancers. Metformin in clinical studies and association studies has delayed cognitive decline and Alzheimer. And the really cool thing is that there's data of hundreds of thousands of people from pharmaceutical in England that show that people on metformin have less mortality than people the same age, same pharmaceutical, same doctors who do not have diabetes, okay? So if you're have diabetes and obese and have more diseases than people your age, and you're on metformin, you're going to live longer too. So there's a compelling evidence to really repurpose metformin and show in one study, and metformin is a tool here, to show in one study that aging can be delayed. There are 9 studies around the world, and now I ran too fast, Brian. I see I have 5 minutes and I'm almost at the end. There are 5 studies around the world, but let's take this one because it's the most recent one. All of them showing that people on metformin had less hospitalization and less mortality. So in this study, you see the odds ratio of mortality. If you don't have change in mortality compared to others, then your risk is 1. If your risk is between 1 and 10, it's an increased risk in mortality, and below 1, it's a decreased risk of mortality. And you see that being old is about 5-fold risk of dying from COVID, that race is not an issue, that male die more, that obese die more, hypertension tends to be different, people on insulin don't die more, but people on metformin have here 67% less mortality than people without metformin. It's very common to all studies. Another recent study is mortality in nursing home. And the light line here is the mortality on people who are taking metformin versus those without diabetes or with insulin or other drugs whose mortality is high. So there are consistent studies like that just prove the concept that the drug that change the immunity, inflammation, and sustain better aging is able to fight the disease better. And it is really unfortunate that we were not ready to treat our elderly and protect them with metformin, and we kind of missed the opportunity to make such a great impact on mortality that hasn't been shown by even close by any other intervention. The TAME study is going to take 65 to 80-year-old people, 3,000 of them in double-blind placebo-controlled study, and show that the time to the incidence of any major age-related disease, okay, whether it's cardiovascular disease or dementia or cancer or death, is going to be prevented, and we're going to look at secondary markers as well. I want to close with several points. First of all, the CDC out of Atlanta I don't know which organization you have. It's been better than the CDC, I'm sure, but the CDC has had a list of the conditions that are at increased risk for severe illness for COVID. Look at them. Do you see aging here? I mean, this is just unbelievable to me that aging, which is a bigger risk factor than any one of them, is not included in. And worse than that, they also have a list of conditions that might be at increased risk for severe illness. Okay? And aging is not here either. And when I told the FDA, the CDC, I said, what's going on? They said, well, you know, but the aging is not a treatable condition. Well, you know, obesity is not really treatable. Sickle cell is not treatable. And you have something that is much more treatable than any one of those. And it just showed that the perception is not there yet across. People live in silos and don't get the message. And that's why it's so important to have people like you listening and starting this wave that will eventually spread and make sure that we know that aging is a disease and it's a treatable disease. Actually, let me make some of those points that what I made biological, kind of gave you some data is that the mechanism of aging and longevity in humans is similar to other animals, unlike other examples for disease, that genetic studies help drug development. I didn't tell you that there are 2 drugs based on genetic findings from my cohort, that it's important to know the biological versus chronological age, and that aging can be targeted in a clinical trial. I want really to end by making this point and where are we going? Where are we going now? And some of it is in my book, Age Later. But one of the really cool things to think about is that you can take a sperm of a 70-year-old man and fertilize the egg of a 50-year-old woman. And we can actually measure the age of the sperm and the egg. And it really doesn't matter what their age, because when this blastocyte is starting, when the embryo starts, when the cell starts dividing, they all start in 0, okay? We started not knowing, not remembering the age of our parents. There was a shift in the programming, in the epigenetic programming, and we started at 0. And there's lots of labs and biotechs that are trying to think of that. How can we erase aging? What is the strategy to erase aging? After all, we figured out how to do it in this example. We should be able to do it in order to make a much more impact on aging. So life expectancy now, or maximal life expectancy for us as a species, doesn't mean we cannot change it, is about 115 years. We die before the age of 80, a little bit better in Singapore, but we have 35 years that we can start realizing right now. And you guys in Singapore and us will do it. Thanks so much, Brian. Thank you, everyone. And I'm ready for our discussion.
Great, Nir. Thanks a lot. That's I think, very enlightening talk. It covers a lot of ground and gives us a lot to discuss too. And I thought I would just end with, or start with where you ended, which is on older eggs and sperm. I don't know if you know, but we've just started at NUS, Asian Center for Reproductive Longevity and Equality. And one of the goals of it is to look at interventions that target aging to see if we can improve fertility and healthy fertility in women in older ages, so they have more choice about when they want to have children. So we're now starting to work at that interface.
Well, that's a great place. So let me tell you which project I would encourage you to do.
Okay, I'm taking notes.
Sorry?
I'm taking notes.
So it happened that I heard this lecture this week, but there are two proteins, and I'm not going to risk saying the wrong name. Two proteins that are in eggs, that if you overexpress them in somatic cells, they cause cancer. Okay, and the investigator tried to find why they don't cause cancer in the ovary cells. And they found protective proteins that could prevent cancers in somatic cells. Okay, this is the link that I want to find to aging, because maybe it's not Yamamaka factors only because they can cause cancer. Maybe you have to also induce some of the protective proteins that prevent cancer.
Now, that's interesting. I'll have to look for that. You know, it's funny you mentioned that CDC study, because Matt Kaberlein sent me some data. You know, that during the COVID epidemic or pandemic, the NIH was given an extra $4 billion for research. And so he looked at where that money went. How much you think went to NIA? National Institute of Aging?
0 plus minus?
0, yeah, pretty much. So even the NIH is still doing this siloed thing and not really seeing, I think, the importance of understanding aging in the context of all of these conditions.
So one of the good things, there was the New York Academy of Medicine had a huge event that included Fauci and the pharmaceuticals. And after begging for the first time, they had a whole session on, they call it immunosenescence. And they had one speaker, which was me, for this whole session. But I was so blunt and so angry, and showed them the data, that I'm now invited to every immune conference in the world, because it shows you're in silo. I mean, Fauci is 80 years old, and he's at the NIH. He should know that there's a National Institute of Aging, and he should have asked, what's going on with this aging, and could we do something about it?
Yeah, well, you know, you get invited to every conference, so I guess no good deed goes unpunished, right?
Yeah, well, at least I'm doing it during the day. You're doing it at night.
Exactly. So I wanted to come back just briefly on this vaccine response, because, you know, we didn't hear much about how older people were going to respond to COVID vaccine in the mainstream press. And we all know that influenza vaccine, that as you get older, you don't respond as well to the vaccine. And I think that just to clarify your point, what you're saying is they did do studies in older people, but they chose the healthier older people to do the vaccine studies in, right? So, you know, and it's interesting because every country basically said, let's give it to people over 80 first. And I'm not sure that's the best strategy, because they may be the people that don't respond as well to the vaccine. So maybe you could elaborate a little more on this issue.
Well, first of all, I'm really following that, and I'm getting extra data. And I think that those vaccines are better. The Pfizer and the Moderna, at least, are better than the flu vaccine. Okay, I have no doubt. But one of the things I pointed out, or I'll give this example. I had the disease, and then I got 2 shots of the Pfizer vaccine. I was more sick in the vaccine. I wasn't very sick because I'm on metformin, and I'm also intermittently fasting. So both my wife and I continued working. It wasn't a big deal. I lost my smell for lots of months, but it wasn't a big deal. I was much more sicker with the vaccination, because then you see what is the inflammatory response really without the virus eating you, right? So I didn't cough, but I had. My mother-in-law is 88 years old, and she is multimorbid. Okay, she got the vaccine, the first and the second. She had nothing, not in her arm and not anywhere else. So for me, she wasn't immunized. You have a lot of data, and people are saying this is great. The elderly people have less reaction. Okay, they have less side effects. Well, I think they're immunized less. And those are the people who are relatively healthy. Okay, have maybe one morbidity. So I'm still watching, and I think that this vaccine is going to be more effective than the flu, but by no way is it going to be close to the 94%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let me go back a little bit to the TAME trial, because I know a lot of people know about that. I get asked about it all the time. So you're going to start after the COVID epidemic ends. And I think that's great. We have a clinical study going on right now in the US. And the control parameters are all over the board because people are locked down, they're not in lockdown, they get sick, they get healthy. So starting after makes sense. But so it's been a challenge to it's a huge study and it's an important study. It's also been a challenge to raise the money. So is it all there? Is it ready to go?
I think so. So there's going to, in May, it's going to be announced. There's a huge non-profit organization that is coming out of the Middle East and is going to spend $1 billion a year to stop aging, pretty much. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I think that's what we need. Mm-hmm. This is like a Gates Foundation, right, effort. And I'm going to be on the scientific advisory board, so I'm kind of I'm kind
of. That means I have to buy you a lot of drinks, right?
Sorry?
I have to buy you a lot of drinks then.
Well, you know that I don't drink. I mean, the only drink that I drink is Singapore Sling. And part of it is because you don't know there's alcohol. I don't like the alcohol part, but I like drinks that are sweet and pink and have umbrellas.
I'll keep that in mind.
We're Sling at Raffles. And what I'm pushing this organization to do, I hope this is not too public, I shouldn't be really too public, is to do 5 TAMEs, okay? We shouldn't even think small anymore when there's $1 billion thing to spend. There should be a rapamycin study. There should be an SGLT2. I'm actually writing a paper that prioritizes the repurposing of drugs that by ITP and others, we think that they can target aging, acarbose, and really do 5 TAME studies, TAME-like studies around the world.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, I know, because it's a challenging study, right? Because it's essentially a prevention study, and I know that that's always something that pharmaceutical companies are a bit scared of because it takes a long time and costs a lot of money.
It does, but this is the good news. If I had to do a study for each one of the indication, I would need 5 times more people, or at least 12,000 people. If I go to people over the age of 65 that in the next year are going to have any one of a morbidity, as I said, I don't know what they're going to have next, but it's included in the TAME.
Yeah.
Then you're getting many more events. If you are agnostic, okay, look, this is the message I think that's most important for us. We have to be agnostic for diseases. Okay, we don't care what disease you have. We want to prevent the next one, which we don't know what it's going to be. Okay, as long as this is the concept, we're taking a construct of diseases and we're just shifting them away. The individual, maybe it's decided which disease is going to get, but from an aging perspective, we want to take all of them and shift them. And if you do it, if you have a construct of diseases, you need much less people or much less time in order to get the results. So in fact, in pharmaceutical term, this study is very cheap.
Yeah. Well, that's a general problem, right? Even if you take rare childhood diseases, you have one disease that there's a foundation for and it gets a lot of research, and another disease that might be reasonable to treat by a pharma company, even though it's rare, so they develop a drug. Then you have another disease that's hard to do a clinical study and there's no foundation and nobody pays attention. It's a general problem that we don't.
I'll tell you how we are dealing with it now, because I'm the scientific director of AFAR. So I got Regeneron. Regeneron is a pharmaceutical that says, hey, who cares about animals? There are 7 billion people in the world. I don't know how much. If we had their exome sequencing and their electronic medical record, we'll cure any disease in the world. And they're pretty much doing that. So they are going to support, them and Pfizer probably are going to support an effort to recruit 10,000 centenarians as a beginning from, if we can, from across the world. And so our disease is not going to be disease. Our disease is going to be the centenarian. And it's this American Federation of Aging Research in its front page, just like with diabetes, you have the diabetes patients, we have the centenarian or the families of centenarians. And it's another way for us to say, hey, we're about health and lifespan and not about a disease. And also, of course, make all the data available for people in order to understand the whole genetic component of longevity. Some of them are private examples and some of them are public examples, but that's how we are looking at that, you know, this foundation.
So my boss, Tom Shinyi, is telling me we have to go to questions, but I'm going to steal just one more question before we do that, because I get asked this all the time. I think I know the answer, but I want to hear you say it. Metformin, people with normal glucose levels, is it safe? Should they take it?
Yeah, metformin, as I told you, metformin was taken not for diabetes. And metformin acts not as a hypoglycemic agent like sulfonylurea. It's an anti-hyperglycemic agent. What it really does in normal people, it decreases their insulin level, which is good. It's not going to cause you hypoglycemia. There's no case of metformin hypoglycemia unless you take other drugs like insulin or sulfonylurea. So metformin is absolutely safe in normal people, and there are millions of people now that are taking metformin for an aging indication. No one has hypoglycemia.
Great. So I'm going to bring Shani in now and let her ask some questions.
Thanks, Brian. So we have a lot of questions, and so I'm just going to start off with the very basic one, which a lot of the audience are asking. So, what is the dosage of metformin used to prevent aging? And some of them do ask, when should we start? And some of them do ask as well, is it a prescription drug or can it be obtained over the counter? Thank you.
Oh, right. Terrific. So, you know, I'm originally from Israel, and we used to say that a camel is a horse that was designed by a committee. Okay, we had a committee that argued what's the dose of metformin. Some said we should give a higher dose so it really is effective, and some said, are you crazy? To older people, you give also always lower dose. And what we did, we looked at the studies and we saw that the data comes from a dose of 1,500 milligrams. And this is the dose that we chose for the study. And we give it in extended release form because they have less side effects. So this is the dose. The question of when should we start metformin is nothing that we're going to solve in time. We think that it's never too late really to target aging. You know, maybe we get smaller returns in some drugs eventually, but we do it in age 65 because of what just I said, because we need a lot of diseases to happen in a short time. But most of the studies have given metformin actually at people who are 50 years old. So when the drug is going to be given, and look, every one of the drug that we have will have to, there are lots of consideration of when to start, combination of drugs. You know, senolytics is probably not effective in 40 years old, right? You need to give it to 80 years old. So this will all have to be discovered, but that's what we're going to do, and it doesn't mean that we told you the right dose or the right age.
I see. Thank you.
There was another one. There was another one.
Yeah.
Oh, a prescription. Yeah, it's a prescription drug. So, you know, and I'm trying to stay out of it, but I'm telling people, first of all, ask your doctor what's your hemoglobin A1C. When you're over the age of 60, you have almost 50% chances of being pre-diabetic. That most of the people with pre-diabetic will not convert to diabetes, by the way. And if you're pre-diabetic, you tell the doctor, hey, pre-diabetes, metformin, there's a study, give me metformin, and the doctor will give metformin. By the way, it's the cheapest drug in the US pharmacy. Another thing that I do is, if the doctor doesn't want to give metformin, I send them several article reviews on metformin and aging or on TAME. And then one of two things happen. Either the doctor reads the papers and converted, or he doesn't want to read the paper and he just prescribed metformin.
Thank you. So I think we have another question here. Someone did ask, what was the rationale for choosing metformin in your clinical trial and not other potential candidates?
The main one is we don't want to kill anyone on the way to success. So it was easier to take a drug that is 70 years old, that we know exactly what's going to happen, that we know it's not going to kill anyone, that has lots of clinical data to support that, rather than drugs like, rapamycin might be more effective. By the way, I'm not sure that what happens in mice is exactly going to be transcribed to the same effectiveness in humans. Okay, I'm not sure that that's going to be the rule. But if you would ask me which drug has the biggest effect, I would say rapamycin. But rapamycin is a drug with a lot of safety issues that is given to people who are sick, and you never know if those issues are because they're sick. It increases glucose, and it makes sense that it would increase glucose, but it's in high dose in people who are also in steroids, which also increase glucose. So it was much easier to come. As I said, metformin is only a tool, okay? It's only a tool. It's an effective drug, but it's only a tool for the FDA to break through and say, hey, prevent aging.
I see. Okay, we do have a couple more questions, but I will just go with this one. And the question is, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, can metformin be given with other anti-aging drugs? And do you know what would the effects be? Could you comment on that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Let me try. It's an insightful question. So I would tell you simply that the intervention testing program in animal have done a combination of metformin and rapamycin, and this combination has increased lifespan in animals the most than any other intervention in the ITP. Okay, so that's one answer. But there's another answer. When you give metformin, when you do metformin and exercise, both are anti-aging therapy, or we should say geroprotectors or gerotherapeutics. When we do exercise and metformin together, then metformin would prevent the hypertrophic response of the muscle, okay? Which there are several papers about it. And then we took biopsies from those people and looked at the transcripts. And what we found is that there was an exchange where the exercise increased mTOR, which we don't like really in aging, but it's behind the hypertrophic of the muscle. And the metformin prevented the mTOR. However, the metformin changed the aging characteristic of the muscle. For example, it promoted autophagic response. At the end of the study, although the muscle was smaller in people who exercise on metformin, the strength of the muscle between the two arms was exactly the same. So that means that the muscle on metformin, although it's smaller per gram of muscle, it was actually better. But it underlines the fact that we do have to do the studies and find what's antagonistic maybe between drugs. Do they cancel each other? Do they increase side effects of each other and things like that? And we'll have to find it out. But I wouldn't take it for granted that every combination goes together, as in my example with exercise.
Sorry, Nir, you said metformin is better than rapamycin, so I just left.
No, I didn't.
No, I know. Yeah, I'm teasing you. My computer ran out of battery. But I want to just echo that last thought. You know, we've been testing combinations of things in mice, and once we get to 2 or especially 3 different things, I can't predict what's going to happen. And so until we start really testing multiple things together, I don't think we're really going to know what the outcomes are going to be.
I agree.
Do you have another couple questions for us?
I think maybe just one last one. So could you summarize key challenges for us researchers that we have to overcome before getting metformin approved as an anti-aging supplement for the general population?
Well, the basic challenge for gerotherapeutics now, and I wish I took maybe a minute more to explain that, is biomarkers. Now, we were thinking of biomarkers. We want to know what's your biological age and not chronological age. And we were arguing, and it's in time where we didn't have a lot of data. In fact, the things we came up with, like IL-6, it doesn't even come significant in my proteomic assay of the changes between 65 and 95. So we didn't have the data. But now our question is different. We need those biomarkers to show that the gerotherapeutic works. And we need to know it soon. We don't want to do a tame study, 5-year study for every drug and have a success rate of 5%, okay? We want a biomarker that in few months on a phase 2 trial will tell us, you know, this has changed. It means that this drug really changed aging. Let's go to a full clinical trial. And this is the challenge that we have now, that I'm pretty sure that it's a year or two. Will take a year or two because they're existing study. We just have to get them and do the biomarkers in an omic way. But in a year or two, I'm pretty sure that we'll have consensus. Of course, one of the things that TAME is doing, and this is already supported by the NIA, is biomarkers in the TAME study. So we'll take biomarkers, and actually the biomarkers will work in half a year in order to see already what's the difference between those on metformin and without.
Nir, I think we're running out of time, but thanks a lot for doing this, and I can't wait till you get back to Singapore. I just want to remind the people you can use the panelists and all attendees button to increase chat after the talk. One thing you can do, if you know where the best Singapore sling in Singapore is, let me know, because I need to know that when Nir gets back. Our speaker next week is going to be Joan Manick, who's now the head of research and development at Life Biosciences, and she'll be talking about targeting aging as well. And I'm going to leave you with a clip of what happens when kids meet a 101-year-old person. Thanks for joining us.
Are you afraid of dying?
No, I'm not afraid of dying. I feel very healthy and happy. My doctor said, maybe you'll just die in your sleep. So I'm not afraid, because I have a good life.
What's the secret to living a long life?
Being happy, working hard, getting exercise, doing things for yourself, not expecting other people to do everything for you. And all of those things make you live a long time.
Nice to meet you.
It's wonderful to meet you. Have a great life. I'm very proud of you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Nice to meet you.
I'm feeling like sunshine, like springtime, like something's in the water and I'm taking a deep dive. I'm feeling so weightless, like I'm gonna make it, and nothing in the universe can take this. I can see it clearly now, nothing gonna bring me down.